but I wanted to bring on Adrian. Adrian's a black belt in Jiu Jitsu, and we wanted to talk about certain things that probably don't get talked about enough in Jiu Jitsu. In fact, many combat sports have these issues, but I think Jiu Jitsu is special because in Jiu Jitsu, you're in certain crumpled positions all the time, and you're doing certain moves all the time, and it kind of imbalances the body a lot. And I've talked to a lot of Jiu Jitsu guys about this, so that's why I wanted to bring on some black belts to share their stories. I knew one Jiu Jitsu black belt who told me for a while he couldn't even lift his arm above his shoulder. And
shoot, I could barely do it now.
You could barely do that now, right? So, Adrian, what do you think it is in Jiu-Jitsu that causes so much imbalances? Is it inevitable, or do you think it's just like something related to how a lot of you guys train and maybe the lack of awareness?
Man, you could say this. You could actually put this to almost every sport that requires a repetitive movement. Mm-hmm. So, like, I mean, the shot putter dude has been doing the same motion over and over, but you have to make sure he's cross training. He's got to cross train, and that's the problem with most guys in jiu-jitsu. They're freaking burnt out already. They just did a 9 to 5 and they go home. Then they get ready for jiu-jitsu. They go and they do what they did and they called that their exercise. Then that's it. Then they go home and then now they've got the aches and pains and the body's doing its stuff and building. So you're doing a lot of the pushing and the pulling. So you've got, I mean, more often than not, you're doing a lot more pulling. Guys tend to do this. You start doing this, and then you start getting all the weirdness. Right. Most guys don't even know about, strengthening your rotator cuffs, and a lot of stuff will be imbalanced. I mean, a lot of guys I have experience in jiu-jitsu end up having lower back issues because they don't really use their butt muscles and
the glutes. So important, man.
They aren't using it. So you just, I mean, like, a lot of guys won't necessarily have a lot of chest either. So it depends. Well, it really depends on your style, and your style will dictate your imbalances. Right. So it's a thing over all the sports, and I think a big issue is just not being coached correctly into keeping yourself maintained enough to do it for long periods.
And it's great you mentioned things like, for example, shot put, because I oftentimes, because I subscribe to so much physical therapy, so much workout pages on Instagram, I get recommended kind of pages to help other types of sports athletes correct imbalances. Like, I was just recommended yesterday how to correct your tennis elbow or your golf, So, like you said, I think the way I premised this video probably is a little mistaken. It's not that jiu-jitsu leads to more imbalances. If you become good at any sport, you're going to have imbalances if you don't train it correctly. Swimmers, if they train it correctly, they will have to balance their body. Most people who only do breaststroke, if you only do breaststroke without rebalancing your body, you might have stress fractures in your legs and stuff like that. So I think I'm glad we talked about this topic, because with any sport, guys, you have to think about not just the muscles required for that sport, but the muscles required for a healthy life in general.
Having safety around the joints, just in general, is going to make you happy in your sport.
Yeah, exactly. And with this being said, because jiu-jitsu is the topic of this video, let's talk about other imbalances. So we mentioned kind of glute imbalances, and I do realize that most moves in jiu-jitsu don't require the glutes necessarily.
Not so much. I mean, you've got butterfly sweeps. I mean, a lot of you become so efficient at your skeletal lineup that you stop using muscle. Not to where it's zero muscle, but you're so efficient at your skeletal connections. You stop thrusting. You stop doing all these things that was getting you sore from the early days of your jiu-jitsu experience.
Exactly.
And then you start atrophying in certain areas, and you get strong in certain areas, and that's just the way it is. But for myself, I ended up having like weak knees. I started having not strength in here, and I wasn't really sure. But when I use my butterfly sweep, I connect in a certain way that when I fall, the fall in line with the frame inside my bone creates the lift. I'm not using all these smaller muscles. I use the big ones that kind of do the job. So that's that. And then there you go. You end up getting weak in the smaller ones that leads you to a lot of the imbalances.
Yeah, that's so interesting. The other imbalance that Adrian and I talk about, because we both have had certain neck issues, right? Me especially, I've been following my journey. I've had neck injuries in addition to neck issues. So I think in jiu-jitsu, because there's so much, when you put your chin this way, it's called flexion. There's so many flexion-y movements this way. There's not as much extension movements that way. So that leads to a certain kind of imbalance. The same kind of imbalance for people who are on their phones or on their computers a lot, but times 10.
Yeah.
Because, it's like really, really flexion. So I think that's an area that a lot of jiu-jitsu guys have to watch out for, is you have to train your neck to balance out. Because if you don't, you're going to, end up like this or something like that. A lot of jiu-jitsu guys end up like this. So I always talk about chin tucks. So do your chin tucks, do your neck extensions, and probably do some side flexions, etc. So we could do a whole series on neck exercises, but that's an imbalance I notice in a lot of jiu-jitsu guys. In fact, I know a jiu-jitsu guy, and I'll probably bring him on soon when he's comfortable talking about this. He, for a while, would get numbness, too. That's how imbalanced he was. It wasn't because of he thought he had a herniated disc, but I felt around his neck. I'm like, if he had a herniated disc, this is what would happen. And he didn't have it. It was literally just muscle imbalance. And he's been doing the exercise I've been giving him, and it's been helping him. He doesn't get numbness anymore. So, neck, man. So, Adrian talked about glutes and knees, neck. So those are 3 problem areas for a lot of jiu-jitsu guys. In fact, a lot of jiu-jitsu guys I know have had to have like knee surgery, had to have their knees drained. It seems like if you don't correct that imbalance, it might lead to some bad issues, So correct those imbalances.
Yeah, I actually so when I'm like this, I look down and I look to the left or to the right, I'll start to feel my index and my thumb want to get into like some sort of electric shock. So, and I have to do jiu-jitsu to where this connection doesn't happen on me. I have to stay away from that. And it's been my entire experience with jiu-jitsu, and I'm sure that's an imbalance, 100%.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any other types of experience with like I would attribute to like a bulge in my disc or anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like that. And another lesson to this talk is, a lot of these kind of issues in the body are fixable, right? It's not really that bad. Most people who get like broken discs or herniated discs, it's like some kind of major accident. Just jiu-jitsu usually won't cause that. So a lot of it just takes fixing imbalances. And that's another point of this talk, is that a lot of times it's never too late to fix imbalances. It's never too late to get rid of whatever pain you have.
Yeah, not too late, especially when YouTube is available to just check out your information. There it is. You have pain right here. Google it. Yeah, it's right there, and you find out there's a whole rabbit hole of information. And to seek out. And on a related note,
a lot of non-jiu-jitsu guys, especially guys who do striking, because their chins are down and they're always throwing strikes, right? So you see this motion. And yes, coming back is a little bit of a balance, but still think about when you do striking, which muscles might be imbalanced. If you're always throwing strikes, potentially these muscles coming back need strengthening compared to these muscles, right? So these are just things to think about. Think about what you're doing, whatever exercise you're doing, and think about, am I balancing out the muscles that are the reverse, the negativas, whatever you call that?
Yeah. I think a big part of after getting in, because I had been doing jiu-jitsu for so long, I didn't really feel any of my imbalances until way later. Yeah. And then they really start showing themselves, and it sucks to do this late. It really should be a thing you start doing from the beginning. Like, to be able to do jiu-jitsu, you must work the whole thing. You have to attend to all of it. Otherwise, you're not gonna have a good time 8-10 years down the road.
Yeah. And I will add to what Adrian said. A lot of times, if you don't feel them 8 to 10 years down the road, you'll feel them when you get injured, right?
Yeah.
Part of the reason why injuries happen often is because there's imbalances.
Yeah.
So I was blessed in a way that I got injured so early on in my jiu-jitsu journey that my imbalances were being shown, and I had to either correct them or not be able to do jiu-jitsu anymore. Take the lessons from Adrian, who has been doing jiu-jitsu for like 10 years, for me, who got injured early, and correct those imbalances, and whatever new imbalances might come up, start preventing them proactively so you don't get hurt and you don't feel certain weird things 8 to 10 years down the line.
Yeah. And you don't get like like Jerry was saying, you don't get surprise injuries.
Yeah.
I had a slap tear, which is, I don't know, you can Google it, but it's supposed to be some sort of connection in the back. I couldn't raise my arm for like 3 or 4 months, and I still had to teach privates like that. So I ended up doing jiu-jitsu like this, and it eventually healed. But it's like that existed because there was some other stuff that I didn't know that I'm supposed to take care of.
Yeah.
And you think you're so safe because you do jiu-jitsu, and you're like, okay, well, I don't put myself in bad positions, but your body's in a bad position at all times. You're just in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of things. A big problem I used to have at the beginning of my jiu-jitsu experience was stiff necks. Constantly getting stiff necks, and you're just like, why am I? I mean, if you're a chronic sufferer of a stiff neck, you're like, well, why am I always having this? Maybe you get massages, it's not going away. You try all these things, but there's an imbalance. Yeah, there's a big imbalance.
Yeah.
Until you deal with it, it's just going to be there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I would encourage anyone training in jiu-jitsu or whatever sport, don't be afraid to ask your professor, your instructor, your teacher about these things. And if the teacher doesn't know about it or doesn't, dismisses it, doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad instructor. It just means you find the information elsewhere, right? The instructor could be amazing at teaching jiu-jitsu, could be amazing at doing jiu-jitsu. He or she might have imbalances he or she doesn't even know about. Right. So why not help the entire community get better? I was telling Adrian the other day, I feel like if every jiu-jitsu guy corrected their imbalances, we would have fewer injuries in jiu-jitsu and fewer asshole jiu-jitsu guys who hurt you accidentally or purposefully.
Yeah.
If you're in pain all the time, you're probably more apt to get mean once in a while, right?
Yeah. It's just being self-aware of what the body is. I think a lot of us, especially when we're young, we just freaking go at it. Yeah. We put ourselves in bad positions because it's like we're not in pain. We're not dealing with anything. Yeah. But there's people that are. Yeah. And that's where when we start injuring our fellow partners. Exactly. Because we don't really know what our bodies are capable and not capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. What was the worst injury you got in jiu-jitsu?
Let's see. Worst injury. So the slap tear was a pretty bad one. I had one guy jumped guard, landed on my knee and straightened out. You know what though? The pain only lasted for about a week. That one wasn't that bad. I had I was in Gracie Nationals, and we did almost a 2-hour match, and then got arm locked in the first 5 minutes or so, and it cracked 3 or 4 times, and that thing was I kept fighting, but I couldn't squeeze my hand, and then after 4 months after the injury, I still couldn't sleep right. And it was pretty. I'd never dealt with it. I mean, to this day, I have two tennis elbows and 2 golfer's elbows on both of them.
Oh, jeez.
I don't. And I'm in the process of rehabbing them, but so I have multiple. I even had one on my left knee. I think it was, where it was on the inside. I didn't know what it was. I didn't go to the doctor or anything, but there was no initial injury that led me to believe I had anything wrong. It was just over time, it was hard to bend the knee, and every time I did, it would just start swelling. And so for 2.5 years, just about all through middle of purple all the way through brown, I would drop my leg, leave it flat, and just fight with one, without a leg. And that in itself was it was an interesting learning experience, because then you learn how to still function without the limb, but it was a pretty painful thing. And all that one needed was some stretching and some foam rolling. There was probably some fascia still connected, and creating an imbalance, because there's some tug and there's some tightness. So that's an imbalance. And it's not. It doesn't necessarily have to be a muscle size imbalance. It could just be a tension imbalance.
A tension imbalance. That's honestly what I had in my knee. I had a knee that was cranked a little wrong in 2015, and for a while I just didn't walk on it right. So it was a tension thing. So it was always too tense. I've been learning to straighten it completely now. It's still not able to hyperextend. I'm able to hyperextend most of my joints because of certain genetic traits. This one can only go straight right now. So once I can make this hyperextend, it'll be back to normal what my left. But a lot of times, and this goes back to something I really want to emphasize to everyone watching, don't be afraid to seek help. It's not a sign of weakness. If you need to rehab it, you need to do physical therapy, you need to do whatever, go do it. Do it as soon as possible. I put off my neck for a while. I put off this knee for 5 years. And the moment I started doing something for it, it started getting better almost immediately, man.
Yeah.
So it is not a sign, I'm just some YouTube troll. He's a black belt. Whoever, gets through to you more. Just remember, it's okay to go rehab something. It's okay to admit you got hurt. It's okay.
Yeah, I've actually I've have some students that will say, oh yeah, I used to do deadlifts and I used to do this. One guy has a jacked up back right now, and I was like, dude, get on the rehab. You're an older guy, man. You're not. Your muscles are just gonna get weaker and weaker as you get old. Yeah. Keep it up now. And he's just like, yeah, I don't know. And like, it almost seems like everyone's just afraid to work out. But I mean, if you're gonna do jiu-jitsu, it's a prerequisite. Yeah. You can't leave that alone. And I did it, and it wasn't worth it. Yeah. Exactly. And I like jiu-jitsu, so it's like, why would you do that to yourself? Yeah. Yeah. And I applied a lot of this knowledge that I learned the hard way now, because I do a lot of striking. So I'm constantly, if I feel like there's an imbalance happening, I go fix it, right? And part of the reason I started fixing my knee was because I was feeling my knee start to act up again doing boxing. And so I'm like, I'm not gonna make the same mistake again. Or sometimes I feel my rotator cuff starting to give out a little, so I'm like, okay, let's not let it give out. Let's like go search information online, and eventually I'm gonna get some products and stuff like that. Just do the proactive thing. Well, we do that. Even the thing is, we do that in our own respective sports. Like for me in jiu-jitsu, if I feel a weakness in somewhere, I go and fix it. Yeah. My guard passing is not so good, so then I work on my guard passing, whatever it may be. Yeah. So we do that already. Just transfer that willingness to actually put your discipline, transfer it over to your body.
Yeah, exactly. It's so funny that we think about the external, right? So we're always like, we got to fix our striking, we got to fix this aspect of our jiu-jitsu, but we don't devote the same amount of dedication to our bodies, our diets, our sleep, our vitamin D levels, which look at us getting a vitamin D right here, and our injuries and injury prevention.
Right. Yeah. It has a lot to do with dudes coming from the outside, not in the athletic world, and just getting into jiu-jitsu. Yeah. They just get into it, and it's just like, it's something to do. Yeah. But this is a combat sport. This thing is designed for killing people. Yeah, exactly. So, if you want the machine to do the thing, make sure you do the thing too. Yeah. Exactly. To add to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So guys, I'm so glad I brought Adrian in, and we'll bring him back for more talks, but this is something that's been on my mind for so long, because I didn't realize there's so many higher belts had so many muscle imbalances until I just started honestly talking about my neck imbalance and how I was fixing it. And then all these really higher belts, top level, even black belts, were opening up to me about things they couldn't do that most people take for granted. And so I was like, I gotta make this video, and I'll bring in some of the other black belts, and we can all talk more about specific imbalances, specific injuries, etc., specific things that maybe could change or tweak in jiu-jitsu culture. But this is the first one, man, and we're gonna do more. So guys, thank you so much. Adrian, thanks for coming on this channel.
Yeah, man, no problem.
Cool.